and influence the Jewish tradition had on our founding fathers and on the foundation of America itself. If you attended college in the early days of America, you would have been studying Hebrew. It was a required course. And many of our founding fathers spoke Hebrew, enough so that it was actually under discussion at one time to become the national language for the new country. Had Benjamin Franklin won, by the way, he only lost by 3 votes, we would all be speaking Hebrew right now. Of course, he also wanted the turkey to be our national bird. All right, he wasn't 100% right on all points. The curriculum at Harvard, like those of many other early American colleges and universities, was designed by men of the Old Testament persuasion. Harvard President Mather, who served 1685 to 1701, was an ardent Hebraist, as were his predecessors. His writings contained numerous quotations from a book that we call the Talmud, which is an exegesis on the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses. He also drew strongly on the works of classic Jewish commentators. Yale University President Ezra Stiles. In 1781, his first public commencement, he delivered an oration on Hebrew literature written in Hebrew and delivered in Hebrew. Hebrew and the study of Hebraic laws and institutions were an integral part of many of our early colleges and universities. King's College, which later became Columbia University, William & Mary, Rutgers, Princeton, Dartmouth, Brown University, all of them were deemed Hebrew to be a basic element of liberal education. And by liberal, they didn't mean quite the same thing we do today. Samuel Johnson, the first president of King's College, said that he considered Hebrew as essential to a gentleman's education. Why the emphasis on a language? And the answer is very simple. The instant you start to translate something, you start to interpret it. You cannot translate something directly because one language to another allows changes. One word can be used in different ways. How many of you have ever seen Michelangelo's statue of Moses? Whether in pictures or in person. You notice he has 2 horns. That's because of a mistranslation. The Hebrew word was karneh, Karen. You have a choice to make when you try to go from Hebrew to English with that particular word. It can be a ray, as of light. It can be a horn, as in the horn of an animal. Or it can be a monetary fund. Personally, I would have always preferred that the translator had used monetary fund and seen what Michelangelo would have done with that one rather than horns. So the Torah talks about Moses having rays of light coming out from his face when he descended from the mountain. But Michelangelo's translator gave him horns. This led to a myth that Jews have horns and worship the devil. Single word mistranslation can mean a lot and have a huge impact. So our founding fathers were emphatic about they wanted to study the documents in the original Hebrew. One year before the American Revolution, Harvard President Samuel Langdon declared that the civil polity of Israel is an excellent general model of government. And he proposed that would be the foundation for the rules for the new country. Those who were entrusted with creating our Constitution took this to heart. They looked at the various Hebraic laws that had been passed by the Puritans. 38 of the original 79 statutes of the New Haven Code of 1665 came directly from the Bible. The same was true of laws of Massachusetts. The 15 capital laws of New England included what is called the 7 Noahide laws. For those who are not familiar with it, after the flood, God gives Noah specific commands, and they include the following: the establishment of courts of justice, the prohibition of blasphemy, the prohibition of idolatry, the prohibition of incest, the prohibition of bloodshed, the prohibition of robbery, and the prohibition of cruelty to living animals. These are called the 7 Noahide laws. Our understanding and the early Christian understanding in this country was that those are applicable to all people of all faiths. When you look at the institutions that were established, you can see and trace back the line to the Torah itself. The House of Representatives comes from a section in Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 13, which said, "Select for yourselves men who are wise, understanding, and known to your tribes, and I will appoint them as your leaders." Then in Exodus 18, verse 19, it says, "Seek out from among all the people men with leadership ability, God-fearing men, men of truth who hate injustice." These qualifications were prescribed in the original constitutions of Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. To be honest with you, I'm rather sad that we got rid of them. I think we still need to seek out from among all the people those with leadership ability who fear God, who believe in truth and hate injustice. There is a principle in Jewish law that no legislation should be imposed on the public unless the majority can conform to it. This requires legislators to consider and consult the opinions of their constituents. And thus we have representative democracy. The truth is, when you look at the laws of the 5 books of Moses, you have a great deal of the founding principles that created the Constitution and the later laws that continued to expand upon the laws of this country. The judicial system that we have is based on the judicial system that Moses set up. There were to be lower courts, middle courts, and higher courts. The courts were to remain totally impartial. And the wording was, "You shall not take note whether a man is poor or wealthy. You shall judge on the justice of the case." The Jewish influence was profound. At the First Assembly of New Haven, John Davenport stated the following: "Scriptures do hold forth a perfect rule for the direction and government of all men in all duties, which they are to perform to God and men, as well as in the government of families and commonwealth, as in matters of the church. The word of God should be the only rule to be attended unto in organizing the affairs of government in this plantation. There were very few Jews in the early days of America. We know that by 1776, there was a total estimated amount of 2,000 Jews here in America. But they had a tremendous impact. In Charleston, South Carolina, every single adult Jewish male fought on the side of the revolution. Many of them lost their homes as a result. Families were put at risk. The first patriot to be killed in the South, in Georgia, was a Jew by the name of Francis Salvador. Among the most important financiers of the revolution was a man named Chaim Solomon. Of whom George Washington said, without Solomon, there would have been no war. And there would have been no United States. George Washington remembered the Jewish contribution when the first synagogue opened in Newport, Rhode Island in 1790. It's still there today. It's called the Torah Synagogue. Washington sent this letter, dated August 17, 1790. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall all safely under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. So what is the unique contribution? One, that all men and women are created in the image of God, and therefore all are equal. Not in abilities, but in the right to live, to pursue happiness, to enjoy liberty, freedom. To consider that every human being is in the image of God means to consider every human being somewhat sacred. Violence against other men and women should never be accepted. 2, all are equal under the law. There should be one law for all. No special accommodations, no special considerations. If these principles sound familiar, it's because they're embedded in the Constitution. But there are basic laws of the 5 books of Moses. Thomas Jefferson thought Jews needed more secular learning so that they would become equal objects of respect and favor. He felt that they had enough knowledge of the Bible, but he believed that there needed to be a leavening, if you will, of the education. Jefferson expressed the view that in such a way all people could attain equal place in society, but the entrance fee was that they should adopt the ways and the outlook of the Enlightenment. His beliefs obviously were formally embedded into the Constitution itself as one of the authors. What's interesting is his push to make sure that those who came to this country learned more of the secular nature actually was defeated. It was left by the founders to be up to the individual to decide what kind of education they wanted to attain. Because they believed that when they talked about liberty, notwithstanding Jefferson's push that there should be a secular education along with the religious, that should be up to the individual. The quote on the Liberty Bell: "Bring out liberty throughout the land to all that inhabits thereof," is a direct quote from the Old Testament, specifically from the 5 books of Moses. There is no area of civil law that has not been influenced by what is contained within those 5 books and the exegesis that came from them that we call the Talmud. By the way, when I talk about an exegesis, I hope you all understand what I'm saying and what I'm talking about. It's very simple. Let's take the 10, what I call utterances, and often are translated as commandments incorrectly, by the way. The Hebrew is aseret devarim, 10 utterances. God uttered 10 phrases. One of them says, if you look at the Hebrew, it says, "You shall not murder." Sounds simple, right? I'm going to leave the mic for a second. My congregants know I like to do this regularly. So what does it mean to not murder? Is it self-explanatory, or do you need to start discussing definitions? You need definitions. If you kill somebody who's attacking you, is that murder? No. Self-defense. So the rabbis sat down, and when they composed the Talmud, they said, okay, so it says you shall not murder. Let's work it out. 1, if somebody attacks you, and you end up killing them, it's not murder. You didn't break the commandment. 2, if you're in the military, and your country is at war with another country, is it murder when you shoot the enemy soldier? Ah, next point. You didn't break the commandment. Believe it or not, there is 5 pages of this discussion. And we end up with a tremendous list of things that are not murder when they're done in the following way with the following circumstances, including the concept of manslaughter. You all know the definition of manslaughter? It's when you kill somebody you didn't mean to, you didn't plan on it. There was no intent. Do you realize that comes directly from the setting up sanctuary cities? Moses has to set them up when they're moving into the promised land. He says, you're going to do this, set up 6 here, and when you cross the River Jordan, you'll set up another 6. Because if you kill somebody by accident, you may escape to a sanctuary city, and there you'll be living, and you will stay there. For you did not commit a murder. But on the other hand, having killed by accident, you are not clean. And you will stay and live in this sanctuary city for the rest of your life, or until the high priest dies, at which point we have a commutation of sentence. But it comes from the concept that killing by accident was not considered murder. It was in a different category. It wasn't to be taken lightly. And so with American civil law and criminal law, what do we end up with? We have the same discussions of when something is murder versus when it is not. There is almost no area of the law that you can look to that doesn't have similar foundational premises. How many of you own property? When you purchased your property, what did you have to get as far as a survey? You had to get a deed, and it had to have the survey and the specific boundaries, right? Torah has the same concept. It says when one sells the property, it should be measured out. And if you move your boundary marker after it has been measured and set out, that's a crime. And it is today. All of this comes directly from that source, which we believe to be God-given. The 5 books of Moses. There are those who take it and they start to interpret or retranslate in different ways. It's usually with an agenda. And it's problematic. But the same is true when we look at certain situations here in America, where we also have seen some people try to change the laws to interpretive level. Both liberal and conservative sides. It's been attempted by both. Making sure that the judiciary is impartial, that the interpretation of the law is as impartial as possible, is a key element in keeping our freedom. And it was one of the key foundational points of the system set up by Moses. We live in a country today founded upon the principles of a tradition that goes back much further. We were blessed to have founding fathers who came to this country seeking religious freedoms and wanted to look at what was called the Old Testament as the imperative guide of how we should set up a society. And because of that, we have the blessings of freedom today. You have a sign in this room that vigilance is the price of freedom. Or something similar. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Jewish law had a very similar take on it. It said if you take for granted when one commits a crime, you become guilty of having committed a crime yourself. If you stand by and do nothing to prevent the crime being done. And if you have a leadership position, it becomes even worse. I've always loved a particular part of law, Torah. It sets out and says, if a body is found in a field, then the leader of the nearest city is responsible for that murder. He must find the murderer, or he must pay the blood debt as a sacrifice. And it specifies what he has to, by the way, enormous price. It's an enormous price. It's like, you're the mayor, you better make sure they find that murderer, or you're going to have to pay out of your own pocket.
You believe they'll find.
Now what happens between two cities? Both leaders are now responsible, and both have to make the sacrifice. The sacrifice, by the way, was a bull. Now that doesn't sound huge, except for the fact that if you think about a lamb was the equivalent of 1 year's salary. A bull was the equivalent of 5. So basically, they're telling the mayor, you either make sure that you have no crime in your community, or if there is crime, that you find the ones responsible, or you have to pay out of your pocket. Which means the leaders are going to be very, very motivated to make sure that crime does not go unanswered. Or you would have very low crime rates.
So what happened to this? Why are we having it today?
I didn't say they took every law out of the Torah. I said they took a great many of them.
This would be a good.
Remember, these were some of the leaders of the country that were looking at this, and they weren't stupid. They looked at this and said, wait a second. The governor of Virginia looked at it and said, I know about 6 murders that took place in my state. No, we're not putting this in. It called for the accountability of leadership. It really did, on an extraordinary level. It lays out an ideal form of government. And while our American Constitution definitely is modeled on it, it's not yet at the ideal point. It's still a work in progress. And I'm going to end by saying, and we're all participants in that progress. Here's the one element I would leave you with, though, on a very sincere level. There's a principle in Judaism which most non-Jews don't quite grasp. It says the Fakeh Laman Torah Devar Tov, which who here speaks Hebrew, so you can translate. To argue for the sake of Torah is a good thing. The rabbis had very heated arguments. Very heated. Some of them so heated that some of the rabbis walked out of the Sanhedrin and refused to come back. Including one who was the head of the Sanhedrin, because the others wouldn't vote with him. But they put down a principle to argue for the sake of Torah is a good thing. I'm going to say to argue for the sake of liberty and democracy and freedom is a good thing.
Yes.
You don't have to agree with the person who holds opposite political views. What I ask is that you believe that they are arguing from what they truly believe, and therefore respectful disagreement. You can tell them you feel that they're totally wrong. You can disagree absolutely on every single point. But respect the fact that they too are looking to build what they see as America. It may not be your vision of America, and therefore we will vote the way we need to. And you can speak to them and try to disagree with them in a way to try and persuade. But I'm very concerned about a recent trend over the last 15, 20 years where civil discourse has become anything but civil.
Disagree with them, you'll die. So they'll kill you.
There are those who believe that if you don't believe the way they do, they want nothing to do with you. They don't want to hear you. They don't want to speak to you. They will on Facebook, they unfriend.
Yeah.
I don't understand this. I have friends I've never agreed with on anything political. They're still close friends. I'm still in close contact. We still enjoy family gatherings, celebrating each other's family events. Because I can see that even though I may disagree 100% politically, there's still a good person there. They just don't think the way I do. The danger is when you start seeing anyone who disagrees as being the enemy. Our founding fathers did not disagree. I started out with a story about Benjamin Franklin pushing, and he had a good number of supporters, for Hebrew to be the language of America. By the way, the reason? English was the language of the tyranny, of the tyrant. They were rejecting the tyranny of England. So he wanted to reject the language too. And many of his supporters felt this was absolutely right to do. Jefferson, by the way, thought it was a great idea except for one thing. And it was Jefferson's thoughts, by the way, that won the day. He said, if all were educated in this new country of ours, this would be a wonderful idea. But since not all are educated, but they all speak English, We need to stay with the language they all know. He liked the idea, but he was practical. But bottom line is, you had the founding fathers often at tremendous odds with each other. There wasn't a single one of the great initial founders who was universally beloved by everyone else in the initial Congress. The Continental Congress. You think politics are bad today. And yet from those disagreements, we have the strength of America today. So remember, whatever your views, as long as you can accept that the other person who is arguing with you or disagreeing with you comes from a place of truth in their own mind, you can accept that they may be wrong, but that doesn't make them the enemy.
I like that truth in their own mind.
I do qualify it in that way. I've known a few who argue for the sake of argument, and it's not what they really believe. And there's also hidden agendas. We know that. That's it. Are there any questions?
No.
All right.
Everybody can hear a question?
I don't think there were any. Are there any?
Yes, there are.
There is
Okay, go for it.
Do I get to go first? All right.
Thank you for coming. Your talk was excellent. I believe that the laws of God, the Torah, the Constitution, are there as well as embedded in the very core of every person's being. I think God put them there. And that's why the laws in the Constitution make so much sense. And I'm wondering.
They make sense for us, but I gotta tell you, other countries have not found it so. Too many others have seen it as an alternative path towards their constitutions and laws. And while I prefer ours, I'm not willing to discount their validity of what they are experiencing. I will tell you that in the Bible, particularly in Deuteronomy, my congregants can almost quote this one because I can keep quoting it time and time again. In a portion we call Nitzavim, towards the end of Deuteronomy, God comes out and says, and Moses relays this, he says, the knowledge of this law is not too difficult for you to understand.
Right.
It's not up in heaven that you have to send somebody up there to go up and bring it down to you. It's not across the sea. It's not far from you. It's not across the sea that you have to send somebody across the sea and bring it back to you. It is within